What was your damn, you live like this moment?
Went to a new friend's house for the first time when I was in the 6th grade. We walked through the front door. Friend. Mom, we're home. Mom comes around a corner. Oh my God, it's so great to finally meet you. Friend talks about you a lot. Gives me a hug. How are you? Me. I'm fine. Mom. Are you hungry? I was about to make us a snack. Dad. Come meet friend's friend. Dad comes around another corner. Hey kiddo, it's good to meet you. Shakes my hand. If you guys are good, I'll take you guys to fun place later and we'll get some pizza. Kisses mom. I'll be in the garage. Smacks mom's butt. Mom giggles. You guys go play in your room. I'll bring you something to eat. I was stunned. They were nice to me and each other. I mentioned it to my friend later, and he apologized because they were so embarrassing. My parents weren't in a room together without at least insulting each other. I really hope friends' parents are still married and insanely happy. Edit. Since this kinda blew up, they were really the nicest couple. They really loved each other. And my friend, from what I saw, I hung out there for a bit. But I ended up moving. Again, about a year later, we indeed went for pizza that night, and his mom made a really big breakfast the next morning. The blueberry cake thing she made still lingers in my dreams. They are the couple that I've most tried to emulate in my marriage of nearly 30 years. It really does help to have the right partner, but it is definitely worth the effort. Story 2. I went to a friend's house that only had one downstairs bathroom. They had piss bottles in their room for when they were too lazy to go for a piss in the middle of the night. 2-liter bottles of piss just laying around their room. Story 3. I once visited a dude I knew somewhat from middle school. I was with a friend who was friends with him. We were 1920. He had only recently moved in, but there was already a small mountain of smelly dishes and a smell of sweat, cause he was playing that VR rhythm game, Beat Saber, which requires a lot of movement. When we were leaving, I had to take a quick leak in the toilet and just said, I'll just borrow your toilet for a minute. His reaction was, as I was entering the toilet. What that had in store for me was to this day traumatic for me. Pee stains on the floor, pubic hair on the sink, and a smell of moldy clothes from the washing machine. He had lived there for less than a month. He has never worked a day in his life and was playing online slots. He often posted about winning something like 2,000 euro, and less than a week later asking 20 euro for food in Snapchat mystery. A couple years passed and he sent me a message, just asking for 10 euro loan for a pack of cigarettes. He said he'd pay back in 5 days when he gets his social assistance payment. 5 days later I ask about the money. He reads the message, but ignores me completely. Doesn't delete me or anything. Just ignores. I tell about it to another friend who knows him and some other common friends of theirs, and he says that I'm not going to see that 10 euro ever again. He's apparently loaned from plenty of people and is in debt over 500 euro to one friend. I almost feel sorry for him, but a lot of those mistakes he made without the use of common sense. Story 4. Friend of mine who just doesn't clean up. There was not even one moment. More lots and lots of them. The amount of plates with half-eaten meals in his apartment was baffling. The fact that it was plural already means a lot in my mind. I once saw him put one away in a drawer just to make some space. Why? Apart from that, he clearly never cleans the toilet, so I don't dare to sit down on it anymore. Also, the seat is broken and repaired with duct tape. No hand soap, no hooks for his towels. They just lie on the edge of the sink. Or a holder for the toilet paper. No paper towels, no dishcloths. And with all this stuff missing, I keep thinking, why don't you just buy that stuff? Don't you miss it? Kitchen is full of dirty dishes. He only washes stuff up when he needs it. And even then he does a poor job. His glasses are just, I don't know how to describe them, but they just aren't clean. His stovetop is always dirty and so is his fridge. And once I found some thick splat of sauce or whatever in front of it. Weeks later, when I came by again, it was still there. I just can't get why you wouldn't try to clean that up immediately. I love that dude, and we trust each other with a lot, you know. But last time I visited there, after a few years of lockdown, I was so disappointed that he still hadn't gotten better, while on many other levels, he has matured so much. Needless to say, I prefer him to come over to our place. Story 5. My GF now wife visiting me unannounced one day when I was living in my grandmother's basement. It was embarrassing, as it was almost at a hoarder level of mess. I was so ashamed at my situation that I changed, mostly hitting 30 years together this year. so I did something right. Story 6. Buddy just had a baby with some girl just as lazy as him. Diaper mountains in every corner of their apartment. Smelled like one too. He also uses dip tobacco, so there were wads of dip on the carpet and in his bed. I don't talk to him much anymore. Story 7. I once had an Arab foreign exchange student friend. She once was complaining that her dad didn't send her tuition fee on time. She was already getting $10K month allowance from her dad, $2K for the apartment she was renting. Rest was for food, and whatever else she was using it for. He was paying her tuition on top of that. This was around 2014-2015. Story 8. When I was 17, I went to a girl's house. She and her mum were smoking in the room we're in. They proceed to ash on the car part. I must have looked surprised, as the mum said, "Oh, don't worry, it's a rental." Story 9. I'm an evac service technician, so I'm in people's houses all the time, every day. All walks of life, from extremely rich on down. I've seen the hoarders and the slobs, but the worst was a house that looked like 6 cats got together to buy a home, then decided to let an old man live with them if he stayed in the corner and put food out. Absolutely disgusting, with cat litter and shit dusted literally through the entire house. I almost left and would have if it wasn't just a case of his coil freezing because the filter was clogged with fur. Felt bad for him? Obviously a mental health issue. Story 10. My sister-in-law and her husband lived at her dad's house. They were largely shut-ins and only left the room to eat and go to the bathroom. After a domestic violence incident, he was killed by police. Suicide by cop, and she was hospitalized for 2 to 3 months. My wife and father-in-law went into her room for the first time in months, years, to clean it up and make it safe for her to move back when she was discharged. There was stuff on the floor up to your knees in places and mid-calf everywhere else. The room reeked of cigarettes, old food, and beau. There were tons of sex toys, clothes, half-used prescriptions, half-drunk sodas, etc. everywhere. It was insane. Story 11. One time in college, another guy from down the hall proudly showed everyone the enormous cum stain under his desk where he had apparently been ejaculating for the entire year. Sad thing is, his poor roommate was very kind and soft-spoken. Story 12. A girl I was dating wanted me to come over to her parents' place. When I walked in, there were boxes of stuff everywhere. I said, "Oh, I didn't know you all just moved in." They had not just moved in. Story 13. My ex literally lives in his room. He's got a mini fridge, a TV on the wall above a desktop setup, a closet full of nothing but snacks, and a bathroom with a tub, wall-length mirror, and 2 sinks. He also had game consoles, a fish tank, a plant he took care of, and a queen-sized bed. Bro literally lives like a king. I vowed to live like that one day. I'm in my own place now, so I just need, everything listed above. I'm getting close to living like a queen. Story 14. Delivered pizzas in my very early 20s in rural A&H and around the Massachusetts border in an area that tended to be economically depressed. I saw it all. Houses where I would gag the minute the door opened from the melange of cigarettes, cat piss, dirty dog, old grease, mold, and other less identifiable odors. Garbage everywhere. Often bulging garbage bags sitting out in the open that were clearly not new, often with visible holes from rodents. Seas of empties, with every surface covered in cigarette ash and unidentifiable stains and crusts. Yards with knee-high grass filled with trash, broken cars and appliances, dog shit, and sun-bleached toys. Floors that felt disturbingly spongy when I had to step inside and walls that were sweating from the humidity. This isn't even half of it, by the way. Rural poverty and the diseases of despair that accompany it is a fast path to the naders of the human condition. Story 15. Entering the room of the guy who rented the space in my house, a separate apartment attached to the main house, he had tons of trash, food containers, half-empty cups of soda, hadn't swept or mopped in the 2 years he'd been there, etc. Absolute filth. Hoarder-level shit. I was appalled, disgusted, and furious. Needless to say, his ass is out. 56-year-old man-child. Made my ovaries shrivel. Just, what the cockroaching f***? Story 16. Horror stories from my social work days. I had a client whose fiancé died, leaving her and their 5 kids alone. She only got a beneficiary payout for the kids that were his, too, and she didn't qualify for other assistance, so she had to start working for the first time in years. The apartment they were in was an utter shit show. Mind you, the kids ranged from ages 1 to 8, so maybe only 1 or 2 could actually help with housekeeping, even though, well, they didn't, and she was so exhausted after every shift, she had no spoons left for housework. Needless to say, the couches, frames with cloth on them, were a Technicolor body horror. The floors that weren't fossilized carpet were practically wooden flypaper, which, appropriate comparison, because roaches. My God, if they weren't stuck to the aforementioned floor, there wasn't a single nook or cranny without a roach or a carcass in it. The dish pile was a nest. The inflatable kiddie pool on the kitchen table was a nest. I refused to touch the garbage bags full of clothes and assorted other items shoved unceremoniously in assorted corners because, you guessed it, nest. Now, here was just the cherry on top. The water heater in this place blew on day, so all of that shit got flooded out. 2 inches of standing water, just rife with all those little buggy bodies and a soup of human neglect. I had to get full body PPE to help clean it out, because the slumlord property owner wouldn't do shit to fix it. She was understandably behind on rent, so I almost suspected he himself sabotaged the tank to drive her out and bypass an eviction. I felt so horrible for this poor woman, because she was doing everything she could to just keep a roof over their heads, and the shit just kept piling on. I came back a week or so later to check in, and the fucking place as still had little puddles and swarmed with carcasses. Oh, and the water heater still wasn't fixed. So that landlord. I did everything I could to help out. But man, I could only do so much before having to change my job title to maid handyman. I left that office a few weeks ago, and the other caseworkers were still working on trying to get her every subsidy they could to keep her lights on. Story 17. When I was in college, a guy I was friends with asked if I wanted to swing by his buddy, Alonzo's apartment. We drive 15 minutes off campus to Al's place, and it's a decent apt in a crappy college town. Al just hung out and played video games all day. He just kinda had a sloppy way, and I later found out that Al's grandmother gave him like $2,000 a month. Not enough to really thrive, but enough to comfortably pay rent and eat, and play Xbox, which is what he did all the time. He wasn't enrolled in college anymore. He just needed 1 more class to graduate, but they don't offer it until next semester, was his line for the 9 months I knew him. He just woke up every day, smoked weed, cigs, and played Call of Duty, or whatever new game he got his hands on, and he looked like it. He was a pasty, doughy, mid-hygiene dude. Then one day his girlfriend came home early. He never mentioned a girlfriend. Just his roommate, and she was nice and mid-looking. You could tell she wasn't happy to see us there, or that Al had spent an entire day doing this again. He probably had chores to do, or was supposed to pretend to go to a job interview or anything to keep the illusion of productivity going. But he didn't do that. We all got the vibe and quickly left. We would stop over at Al's a few times a month, and it was rinse and repeat. Sometimes some sketchier dudes would be there, sometimes not. Al was a decent hang. His place was nice, and he had literally every video game that came out. I finally asked my buddy, what's up with his Al? What's his deal? This is what he does. Yeah, I guess so. I never really asked him. But what about his GF? She deals with all of this. Seems like it. But what's his plan? What's he going to do when his GF finally gets sick of him? What if his checks stop coming in? Why doesn't he get a job? I'll never forget my buddy's response. I never really pried into in. Al's a decent guy and likes to smoke and game, and that's all. He doesn't have to explain all to me, and I don't have to explain anything to him. We just hang out, and that's it. I'm not his life coach. So I learned 2 different ways that people lived. 1, some people will just scrounge by, and they're okay with that. 2, some people don't need to pry into everyone else's person business and judge it. Story 18. Back when Foxtons let homeowners do for sale by owner with the Foxtons system doing advertising and setting up appointments, I looked at one old Victorian house in a nice suburb that was surprisingly inexpensive. Once inside, it was clear why. It had stacks of newspapers, magazines, etc., everywhere, leaving just a few paths through the house. Leaks were apparent, etc. The woman owner who was showing us the house apologized for the mess, as they were preparing to move out. But it was obvious this was a hoarding problem, and not moving piles. Then we got to a room that was locked, and she told us it was her husband's lock, and she didn't have the key, so we couldn't see the room. As she continued showing us around, she mentioned that she homeschooled her kids. That was the moment I realized the kids lived like this, and both parents were likely a bit mentally unstable. I still wonder if I should have called CPS to do a check. Story 19. My brother-in-law and his ex-wife. My former friend lived in a very messy apartment. Dirt everywhere. Q-tips, tissues, and her fake nails that had fallen off all over the floor. Dishes piled up in the kitchen despite having a dishwasher. Cat food all over. Filthy cat dishes, crumbs all over the couch, etc. Just disgusting. Ex-wife refused to get a job and stayed home all the time, so it's not like they were too busy to clean. She just didn't. And then they had a kid, and they didn't clean up anything from the kid. Diaper bin was overflowing. Place absolutely reeked. Bottles left to rot because they would buy new ones instead of cleaning the current ones. Shortly after this, they moved because their landlord kicked them out due to the fact that they were damaging the unit. I got kicked out of my house by my mom, and the only place I could go was their spare bedroom. Somehow, the previous mess was not as bad as the new one. Now, instead of the dumpster being just across from the front door, they had to walk to the side of the building. It took maybe 1 minute to get to and from the dumpster. Apparently, this was too far. I tried to keep up on taking the trash out, but they produced so much that I'd come home from one of my jobs and find 2 new bags on the ever-growing pile. Food from days ago would still be sitting on the stove. I couldn't even cook because there was no space. My one request was for them to not touch the few dishes I had because they were all special. And one day, I came home to find a glass my now husband had gotten me shattered on the floor. They wouldn't clean the litter box, instead letting their cat into my room to pee in my plant, which killed it. About a month into this, I said, I'd rather be homeless, and moved out. I came by a few months later to grab a game that belonged to my now husband, and the place was quite literally overflowing with trash. You could barely get through the door. It absolutely reeked. I grabbed the game and fled, never to return. Made me feel a lot better about the occasional mess I'd make and leave for a bit. Story 20. My husband's parents are hoarders. I noticed the first few months we were dating, when he still lived at home, he did not want me coming over. We always went out, or he came to my house. We had been dating about a year the first time I went into the house. This was more than 15 years ago, and I still have only been in the house twice, about 2 months apart. I was standing next to a table for about 5 minutes before I realized it was a table. I could just barely see the table leg. It was just a mountain of stuff surrounding and on top of it. What I could see of the kitchen were counters piled high, table completely covered. There was seating for 5 to 6 people, but room only for 1 person to sit down. Rest of the sofa was piled up. Living room was piled to the ceiling with boxes of VHS. Could barely navigate the hallways. Bathroom was filthy and also piled up. I have heard from others it's even worse now. My husband hasn't been in the house in more than 10 years. My children have never been there and have no idea where their grandparents live. They're absent grandparents anyway, so... Story 21. A friend's brother apartment. Example. When he was done with a pizza, he would throw the box and possible leftovers behind the couch. There was 3 feet of trash behind his couch. So imagine his apartment now, but add more trash. Story 22. Had a girlfriend for a long time who would always come to my place. No problem. Not a big deal. She was great and had a really good job in the same area as me. Pretty high up in the chain in DC. Anyways, we were always going to my place. No exception. So one night we were out at the bar and I asked her if we could go back to her place so I can get to know her better and see how she does things. Get a better sense for her. Well, that was the last night we hung out. She was a hoarder, like DSM-5 compulsive hoarder. And she had cats, like an unknown number of cats. So many that I asked her how many she had. And she said it's kind of a rotating number, and every now and then one of them dies, so she hates to give a number and to be wrong. I tried to point out that giving the wrong number was the least of her problems. She wanted to insist that everything was fine, and we could just enjoy relaxing after she cleared the bed. I told her I had to go home and she could call me again when she cleaned up. She never called, and I never missed her. In this, literally, at one point as we were walking through the house to let me out, I asked her how long it's been like this, and how she could survive that way. She literally did not understand the question. It was extremely upsetting. Story 23. I actually had this about myself. Ever since I'd gotten into photography, I've dreamed of one day living as a professional travel photographer, getting paid to see the world, and getting to capture it in a way that fulfills me creatively. For a variety of reasons, I never really had the courage to fully pursue this passion as a profession, so I never really saw myself as living that lifestyle. I work a remote job, and I travel when I can. It's definitely not as often as I'd like, but I get out of the country at least once a year and explore domestically quite a bit. The most positive change I've made for myself is moving to places like Denver, or Eugene, or where I don't have to rely on vacation time, and I can just explore on weekends, or bring my work with me as long as I have internet access. Wasn't until recently, when I was working on my website and some photos at a coffee shop, when a worker approached me and started asking me about my lifestyle and what I was working on, that I realized that I was kind of already living my dream, and he was looking up to me in the way I had done at all the photographers that I took inspiration from starting out. It can be easy to get lost in the little annoyances of our lives, routines, and forget how lucky we are. It felt really good to get a reality check from someone with just how fortunate I am, that even though I may not have achieved my dream exactly as I envisioned it, I'm still meeting most of the goals I had for myself and getting to pursue my passion in a different way. Story 24. Realtor here. One time, I went to an older couple's home to answer some listing questions. Place looked immaculate on the inside. It stank beyond belief, though, and not any normal smell. Imagine mixing gasoline with just a hint of flower-scented air freshener, and it was overpowering. Not a single room in the house was the smell, not vomit-inducingly strong. 7 years in real estate, and it is the only listing I have ever had no choice but to make an excuse to leave early, after the retired couple moved out, but before we put the home on the MLS. We hired a home inspector to find the smell. Turns out these people were keeping toxic mole killer in their laundry room. Instructions even specified to keep it outside, that it was too toxic to be kept inside. It may be a miracle those two are even alive. Story 25. I was visiting my dad and his wife, my stepmom. My dad at the time was using my stepmom's car, as his car was in the shop. He picked me up to go somewhere, and when I looked in, the entire floor was covered in old stale donuts with the frosting picked off and other old food just thrown around. I couldn't see 1 inch of the floor, and the passenger footwell was completely packed with garbage and food. It's obvious the food has been sitting there for weeks. Perhaps even months? At first, I thought it was my younger brother's doing somehow, but my dad explained that it was mostly stepmom just going about her day to day. What she would do is order donuts whenever she would go out. However, eating the full donut was just too much carbs and bread for her, so she would pick the frosting off the top with her fingers and literally throw the rest over her shoulder into the back of the car. I don't really remember what our conversation was after that, but I remember that we immediately went to a self-service car wash vacuum place down the road, and I helped him clear out the entire car. There were old Wendy's bags with half-eaten fries and a burger and open dipping sauce containers. Half-eaten teriyaki chicken in an open takeout container that looks like it's been sitting there for 3 weeks. And various other trash, all from one woman. It's a miracle the car wasn't filled with ants or other vermin. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if the car just got back to the same state within a month. Story 26. I'm a cable guy, so I've seen some shit, but one that comes to mind still haunts me 5+ years later. Also, to preface, I was raised by hoarders. I'm kinda numb to a mess, but this wasn't a mess. This was literally filth. Before I even got to the door, I could smell the unit going up the stairs of the condo complex. Felt very sorry for his stairwell neighbor, opened the door and got punched in the face by the most putrid smell I've ever experienced. worse than anything I've smelled in 30 plus years of life. Next, I noticed that there was garbage everywhere. No surface was clean. Everything was either moldy, rotten, or both. The couch was covered in dark mold spots, even some of the walls. We walked to the master bedroom on the 3rd floor. First floor was parking. 2 and 3rd were the unit, and the smell somehow got worse. I was holding back gagging at this point. We passed the bathroom upstairs, and the toilet was literally full of feces and junk. The curtains in the master were moldy. The bed had sheets with dark spots on it, and just everywhere was mold and rot. After I left, that smell followed me around the whole day. It was literally stuck in my nose for 5+ hours. I obviously couldn't ask why they lived like that, but I know that person had never cleaned that condo, and probably themselves. This guy might be the only person I'd actually want an HOA to go after. Story 27. Went to a visit friend who just moved into a house with their partner, and how every room of their place is filled with trash. Old pizza boxes, and Amazon boxes. Now, I've never been one to keep my room or living spaces in order. Things get disorganized very easily, but at least try to contain it to my room where guests and my roommates don't normally venture into. But there, I was in shock. It looked like they had never once taken out the trash, but just compiled it all together and threw it in a different room. It was like if my freshman dorm had invaded and conquered a small house. I haven't said anything to them, and I haven't been back to their place since, even though they keep inviting me. I had a come-to-Jesus moment staying there, and realized that I should get better at cleanliness. Story 28. Looking for a room while returning from my overseas Erasmus semester, I had a couple viewings lined up. One of them was with a realtor for a room in a family's house. He would not show me any photos beforehand, and once the door opened, I understood why. The hallway you walked into, you could see where they walked. Near the walls, you could see just a layer of sticky gunk that was not scraped off by people walking there. The stovetop in the place was covered in a layer of fat. The freezer was frozen over, but the ice was not white, ice color. I was graciously allowed to use the shower if I rented, but I think I'd get cleaner rolling around in the mud. The room itself was tiny. I was expected to cook in there, and it'd be really nice to get a fridge in there since I wasn't allowed use of theirs. They also had cats, and those poor pets were not taken care of. Cat hair everywhere, which stuck to the gunk on the floors. The whole place also had a smell to it, like they never opened a single window. Probably they were gunked shut. I was nice and polite, but made for the door as quickly as possible and ghosted the realtor. He knew what he was doing. Never felt happier to get a breath of fresh air in my life. Story 29. Had a friends with 3 kids and animals. Dog shit all over the floor in her children's room. Cat piss all over the couches. Trash that hasn't been taken out in over a week. As in, it's all over the floor now. Dishes full of rotten food piled up in the sink and on the counters. Marijuana way too obviously placed to be around children at all times, and proceeding to tell her 2 youngest kids that she needs to smoke before handling their problem. So I did, because what the fuck? I don't have anything against marijuana, but I have everything against doing it openly and casually around your children, and them breathing it in and constantly having a contact high. I cannot tell you how many times I've cleaned her house for her, and it never stays that way out of pure laziness. This is honestly kind of a confession post, because I try not to go to her house at all because of this. Oh, and all while screaming at the top of her lungs to clean their own rooms. Miss Thing, do you see your house? They are following your example. Besides, they're a little too young to use bleach, and good luck finding a hazmat suit small enough to fit them, because that is the only thing that would make that house clean. Edit. Every time I've been to her house, it's this way. Story 30. I was really into this girl. She invited me over to her house, and it was almost traumatizing. They had like a dozen pets with various smells and ailments. They were basically unattended and made the house stink. Her 4 older brothers had been in jail. She had to keep her bedroom padlocked, otherwise they would steal from her. Her little brother, maybe 12 at the time, was yelled at for smoking in the house. If you were under 15, you had to smoke outside. Finally, her mother showed up and started telling us all about her health problems, and I had to leave once the prolapsed anus convo started. Story 31. My own contribution was linking up with this girl from a different school that I had been on about 2 dates with. She invited me over to her place, and I literally could not walk around her apartment without having to step over something. Empty boxes, full boxes, clothes, empty bottles, papers and notebooks, etc. Just piles and piles of stuff. Now she told me she had just moved in, and I asked her when. She replied, about 4 months ago. It looked like she had just moved her stuff off the U-Haul and didn't bother to do anything else. Now the place was an absolute disaster, but it wasn't her filthy or like boxes of clothes and clutter, but no plates of half-eaten food or moldy glasses of whatever, or roaches. With the exception of the bathroom. Bit of a tangent, but ladies, please clean your bathrooms. A good portion of the girls' places I've been to have had horrible bathrooms. Hair all in the sink shower. Weird and stuffle, caked onto the countertops, dirty mirrors, obviously uncleaned toilets. Before we did our thing, spent a good 2 hours helping her unpack, and by the end of the night we could actually walk around her place. Story 32. I do home visits to people struggling with mental illness as part of my job, so a lot of the homes I go to are, understandably, pretty messy. A big chunk of my job is getting people to let me in the first place. And since there's a lot of stigma around messiness, it can be hard to get them to a point where they are comfortable letting me see their mess. I often tell them, no matter how messy you think your house is, I have seen worse, and I really mean it. None of my clients' homes have been as bad as the ones I grew up in. My mom's house was so bad that CPS ended up taking custody of my brothers away from her after one visit. By that time, I had already left to live with my hoarder of a grandmother for other reasons. Then I lived with my dad in college because he lived in the same town, so I didn't have to pay to live on campus. His wife was also a hoarder, and their house was always flea-infested. My room was actually a storage room where I slept on a broken cot surrounded by boxes. After that first year, I moved on campus because paying for room and board sounded better than the fleas. Story 33. Used to be an RA in college, and we'd have to do room checks once a semester. We'd let people know ahead of time, and I'd let my residents know what I can't do when it comes to checking their room. I also told them I don't want to bust anyone because, let's be real, we all have better things to do. Anyway, I'm going at it with another rye and knocking on doors, trying to check rooms off the list. We knock on this one door multiple times. Announce ourselves very clearly, knock and loudly say we're keying in. Even after I key in, I gently push the door and knock again, just in case the person has headphones on or something. The stench that wafted into our faces almost took us out. I push the door open, and through the dimly lit suite hallway, I see a whole room full of dog pee poop pads. It wasn't just one or two, but a whole room full of them. They were arranged in this almost too elaborate to be accidental pattern, all of them having shit on them that must have been days or weeks old. We noped out of there, slapped a biohazard label on our notes, and asked the director to follow up with the person. Looked like a depression nest, and I hope they were able to get help. Story 34. Mom of my son's friend would always drop him off at our house to hang out, and she would always comment how lovely our house was, which was a sense of pride for me, as it was my dream home that I designed and built. Then one day, he was going to their house to hang out, so I drop him off. Driving down the road to their house and round the corner to what looks like a French ski chateau, just grand and enormous. Let's just say most of my house could fit in the garage. She opens the door, and my jaw hits the ground with the immense opulence and beautiful woodworking. We exchange pleasantries, and of course I comment, "This is a really, really lovely place." She said, "Thank you," and off I went. Picked up the kid later in the day, says how nice the parents and siblings are. Made me realize that not all rich people are assholes. Only the ones who act like they have money but really don't. Was eye-opening for me. Story 35. My sister's house. I love her dearly, but the place smells of dirty dogs, rotten food, let their dog shit on the deck and never clean it. And there are so many projects her and my brother-in-law started years ago that never finished. I'm not saying I am the cleanest person ever, but when we visit my bother's kids always have an allergy attack within 30 min of staying there. Story 36. Sister of my ex-GF was a messy, even while living with her mother, locking her door and leaving her dog inside when leaving for school so no one was able to see the inside of it. One time she forgot to lock it, and we decided to peek. Dirty plates under the bed, so much used dishes on her blanket that you could stock up a small household, cups full of mold. Disgusting. Fast forward a year, we went to her first boyfriend's flat. She was 18 at that time, her BF 20, to pick something up. Rang the doorbell, and as soon as the door opened, I jumped back a bit because the smell coming from inside was disgusting. The whole floor was covered in empty plastic bottles. Mind you, 25 cents per bottle if you return them, maybe 60 marks. Dirty dishes were piling up in the bathroom sink. Even more in the shower. I just made my way through to him, get whatever we needed to pick up and went home, asking myself how one can live like this. Even more impressive was that he didn't look like this. Always dressed nice and used a lot of perfume. Now I know why. Story 37. Cleaning my hoarding grandmother's house. It had always been bad, but it used to just be piles of stuff, hundreds of blankets and bed sheets, cupboards overflowing with dishware and cookware, mountains of clothing, and piles of books and games. We would visit and argue about how unsafe it was, and beg her to let us help her make space for herself, and it would turn into a horrendous fight every time. But as she got older, she became less mobile and more senile. We were cleaning out her space while she was in a nursing home for a broken leg and dementia, and there was a bowl so full of maggots I thought it was rice. We found cat and dog shit petrified in the bedding piles. At this point, it had been years since she'd had any pets. They had a brown countertop, and it took me a long time to comprehend what I was looking at. It was like looking at brown static. Eventually, I realized I was looking at ants crawling around a slow cooker. Story 38. I agreed to help a neighbor by babysitting her kids. She kinda gave me the tour of the place, and oh my god, it was disgusting. She literally had her child's poop smeared on the stairs, and she just said to walk around it. Like, actually acknowledged that it was there, and said to walk around it. I really should have turned around and left, but at that time of my life, I wasn't really good about standing up for myself. Worst 4 hours of my decade. Story 39. Dated someone whose studio apartment was infested with cockroaches. They were everywhere. When I went into the bathroom at night and turned the lights on, they scattered. He also had a dog, so there was dog hair everywhere on top of that. To be fair, he tried really hard to get rid of the roaches with stuff from Home Depot, and I think it was the building's fault. So I tried to cut him some slack, but it was a lot. Story 40. My freshman year of college, we had a friend, called him Thermos. That was not very clean. I shared a room with one other guy, and Thermos lived down the hall and shared a room with one other poor soul. And they had a bathroom connected to one other dorm, where 2 other friends lived. We didn't really hit it off till about October, and I never went to Thermos's room, but I'd been told stories of his filth. I'd just gotten out of the army, so a true slob like this I just couldn't fathom. He never once washed his sheets. When they turned brown, he just took them off and slept on the mattress. He never washed his towel and reused the same blue one all semester. I don't know if he ever did laundry. He was hairy as a werewolf, and his side of the bathroom had his hairs everywhere. He had bags of dirty laundry in the closet. What never made sense to me was that this dude was straight up brilliant, 4.0 student, and had the appearance of being clean cut. But his room looked and smelled the opposite. Muffer stank. Story 41. Sister's room as an adult mortified me. She lives at home until she was 27, got pregnant, and of course she was told she has to find a place to live with the boyfriend. We have even younger sisters that were 20 at the time that ended up cleaning out her room since she outed off until she went into labor, and they could barely open the bedroom door. The entirety of the floor was so full of clothes and trash it was at the same level of her high-top mattress on its bed frame. It was like an episode of Hoarders. Sometimes I would think I'm messy as a single guy, even though my mess was the odd work piece of clothing on a chair here or there in my apartment. Then I saw that room and immediately felt better about my own hygiene. Story 42. His buddies got an apartment together. On the walk to the bedroom, One wall was piled tits high with fast food bags. The paper bags, when filled, became a sort of brick in this ever-growing monster. The bathroom filled with so many 3-in-1 bottles you couldn't see the floor. Closing the bathroom door pushed them into the house, so they often didn't. If I pissed in the middle of their living room, it would have been an improvement. Story 43. Visiting my best friend on the other side of the country in his modest apartment where he has his cat and all of his instruments. He made me a very dude-worthy meal instantly upon arrival without hesitation. I could tell it was something he didn't make very often as it came out questionable, but I appreciated the thought and effort. I'll never forget the internal battle I fought for the first day to not judge his lifestyle. He did everything he could to make sure I was comfortable and worry-free. And as the week progressed and the good times stacked, I realized that I'd been overcomplicating my life, which was leading to massive mental health battles. He's still my brother to this day, and I have largely simplified my life since that trip, and I'm much happier for it. Story 44. Went to a party at a friend's girlfriend's house. My friend's family was well off. His girlfriend's, though, was next level. Huge beachfront house, worth 20 million plus. My friend took me to the garage to see her dad's cars. It was under the house, had about 10 cars, could have held about 20. Ferrari, Benz, Maserati, Rolls. Fucking unbelievable. Story 45. Walking into the house of the guy I was dating. He had told me it was messy, but I assumed it was the usual bachelor level. Messy? No. No, it was not. There was a layer of dirt on the floor. You couldn't see the pattern of the rug due to cat hair. The kitchen counter was covered in literal trash because he couldn't figure out how to take the garbage to the bin. You couldn't see the floor in his bedroom because it was covered in clothing. The bathroom floor was covered in cat litter. There was crap all over the couch. It was literally unlivable. I tried to be nice and stay for a bit, but I made up a reason to leave after an hour. Disgusting. Story 46. I had a co-worker who was the life of the party. Very charismatic and charming, absolutely adored by everyone. We became close, and one morning he texted me and asked if I could come over to his house. He had been acting a little nervous and erratic. When I came into his house, I was saddened. He had piles of trash everywhere. The apartment reeked of the smell of urine. He had a dog who clearly had been doing his business inside the apartment. His face was full of embarrassment. He had invited me over because he trusted me enough to help encourage him to get his home clean. He had been silently suffering of depression and wanted to tell a friend that would hold him accountable and encourage him to at least begin to clean his place. We spent a total of 10 hours trying to fix up his place, and we did. I felt so much empathy for him, as we sometimes forget how the most mundane things became difficult for us to do when we are struggling. Story 47. I did home care for a woman. She wasn't disabled, just really fat and lazy. She peed in a bedpan so she wouldn't have to get up. Was just the epitome of disgusting. She has a cat. Very sweet. No name. I saw cockroaches in its food dish. It was wet food and crusted over. It was old and disgusting. I took the cat the next time I was there. When I went back, she asked if I'd let the cat out, as he went outside occasionally. I said, nope, must have been someone else. She wasn't concerned at all. She just wanted her damn fried chicken. I'll never forget that cat. Seemed so grateful for his escape. Story 48. I was in the Boy Scouts when I was about 10 and had this friend who obsessively collected every single badge available. I went to his house on the outskirts of town one time to pick him up. I was confused as the house had scaffolding outside and looked like it was still in the process of being built, so I asked him about it. He said, "Oh, we're doing some renovations, so we're sleeping out there for now," as he points out a tent next to the house. I thought, wow, no wonder he has so many survival badges. He literally lives out in the woods. Story 49. Started dating a guy years ago. He was really sweet and fun. We had been dating a couple weeks, and he invited me over to his house. I walked in and almost ran back out. He had 2 puppies who just pissed and shit everywhere. He would take paper towels and lay them over the mess and then just leave it there. There were paper towels all over the hardwood floor. And this wasn't a tiny house or anything. You could see the kitchen from the entryway of the living room, and I don't think he had any dishes that were clean. I've never seen a mound in a sink like that. And the bugs. The bugs were everywhere. I made up that I had an emergency and had to go. Never spoke to him again. Turns out, One of his friends that I happened to work with let it out that he had a drug problem. Those poor puppies. Story 50. I used to be an animal control officer. I was mainly in charge of the shelter we worked at, but one afternoon our super boss called both of us, told us to close the shelter and come to a certain address and bring the van, along with every crate we had, handed N95 masks and booties for our feet, and proceeded to rescue over 100 cats and dogs from a hoarding situation. It was bad. Walking over what used to be the floor was just mind-boggling. There were even holes that had been filled with trash and feces. The person that lives there had passed away 2 or 3 weeks prior. And finally, the apt manager came to do an inspection due to the smell. I don't understand how the smell of the animals didn't get out to this day, honestly. I don't remember how long I was there and how much overtime I put in afterwards, but I'll never forget that place. Story 51. I was pretty well off. Upper middle class 2-story house. Super clean because my dad was OCD. I went to sleep over at my friend's house in 7th grade. Him and his little bro shared a dirty mattress to sleep on at night. No bed frame. Trash scattered around the room. The house was dark, smelled like cigarettes, and his dad had hepatitis from being a user. And his mom was clinically insane and unfit to care for them. She kept apologizing for not having cleaned. I moved schools and later found out his 7-year-old brother died from a mold growing in their house. Followed a week later by my friend Oding on his mom's depression meds. But just a few weeks before all that, his dad died from health complications from his hepatitis. His mom ended up being arrested and put away in a mental hospital. You're in a much better place now, Jerry. Story 52. We went to a friend's house in a suburb of LA. These friends are our age, early to mid-30s, but it was evident they were still living as if they were still in college. Said friends had returned from a trip 3 weeks prior to our visit, and they admitted they had not unpacked or done laundry. The living room had a projector that was balancing on a table, cords stretched as far as they could go, stuff everywhere. They had an outdoor fire pit that required a propane tank, as well as a propane grill. One friend said he couldn't figure out why the grill wasn't working. Knowing him, he probably looked at it for a few minutes and then gave up. So I stepped in and got it working so that we could grill some food. Oh, it was also very hot that day. Heat index of 100. And our friends were both wearing long pants and dark-colored clothes. Story 53. Not one moment, but I used to work in intensive mental health outreach in a number of different locations, so have seen some pretty intense and awful living situations, shelters, rooming homes, on the streets. I eventually went to work in the hospital, and now on the dark side of administration, but did go back to work frontline to help out during the pandemic. Being out of those settings for a while, when I went back into group homes again, the first thing wasn't so much the sight, but the smell of abject poverty in these settings. It's a weird mixture of boiled sausage, piss, and bleach. Hard to describe, but others who work in the field have described the same thing, no matter where you are. It didn't really faze me much when I was younger, but maybe because I've seen so much more now, I just found it so sad. Story 54. I've told my tale of bedbugs before on here many years ago. I am an inner-city property manager of a large apartment complex. I have seen some shit, but the most shocking, and I have seen roaches falling from furniture when it's being moved. That was nothing to the bedbugs of the century. Did you know they leave blood trails? Up on the ceiling, around every corner, and this woman and her roommate just lived in this dark apartment with blood everywhere along the top of their walls. The lights were so dim you couldn't see it. She never opened her blinds. Let me tell you, I will never forget going in with the pest control guy. Yes, I wore PPE and seeing the trails and swarms of bedbugs who'd been feeding off this woman for years, hiding in the dark. Story 55. After I moved away to college and came back for the summer, my mom's house had deteriorated to an unlivable state. My mother is disabled and lives with my stepdad and 2 stepbrothers. I was the only daughter, and all cleaning in the house was forced on my growing up. Once I was gone, it was just awful. Bathroom covered in mold, toilet and sink both revolting. Dishes not just filling the sink, but covering the whole counter beside it on both sides. Every single surface sticky and crusted with food. Roaches. Just Everything you can imagine. And thinking back to how my stepdad would always complain that I was lazy and never do shit around here the whole time I was growing up still makes me see red to this day. Story 56. Walking into my best friend's newly done bathroom. His old bathroom was nasty, looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years. Recently, he nearly completely renovated it. Almost everything was brand new, including the toilet, which after just a few months is just as dirty as the old one, as is the rest of the bathroom. I was honestly very surprised since his GF moved back in after living in a different country for a while. I figured that she did the cleaning and the old bathroom got super dirty because she was gone. But that is not the case. Turns out neither one of them cleans it. Story 57. When I moved in with my host family to be foreign exchange student, they had so much Christianity stuff around their house, and my host parents always had a Bible verse to share whenever me or my host siblings had a problem we couldn't solve. And it got to point. I had to call them out saying, "What the hell happened to you two? My parents said you were so much hippies in the 60s, but now you're just super religious." Story 58. When I was in my early 20s and living with my roommate, we went out to a club one weekend. We both brought women home. The next morning, the four of us were all hanging out in the living room. I was DJing some tunes. My roommate was making bacon and eggs for everyone while all of us had a beer going with our bongs out on the table. One of the women looks at her friend, then at us, and asks, "Is this how you guys actually live?" My roommate pops his head out of the kitchen, looks at me, and we both smile. Yeah, isn't it awesome? We still talk about that day sometimes. Story 59. Knew like 6 dudes living in a 2-bedroom apartment. Only 3 of them worked and paid bills, and 2 of them had a car. They all sat around playing games all day and night, got drunk every day, never cleaned, trash everywhere, piles of stuff, didn't vacuum. At one point, roaches were everywhere. Sit on a couch, in 2 seconds a roach is on you, and another would be on you in 40 seconds. They were unfazed. People were still by to visit all the time, and social media posts from mutual friends made it seem like the place to be. And somehow, all of them living there got laid all the time. How that worked, I don't know. The whole situation was disgusting to me. Story 60. I didn't even make it to his house. He was supposed to pick me up for a date, and when I opened the front passenger side door of his car, the floor was literally covered in trash. You could not see the floor mats, and the trash was at least 3-4 inches deep. I could not believe this dude didn't even respect me enough to clean out his passenger seat before picking me up. Just expected me to sit in his trash on the way to our date. Can only imagine what his place looked like. Story 61. When I went to a new friend's house to teach him one of my recipes and found out the fridge contained nothing but butter and the carrots I'd asked him to buy, he was living on exclusively toast. Several years later, and I'm proud to report, he actually knows how to cook, now thanks to me. Story 62. A few weeks into dating this new guy, I go over to his house for dinner. He made ham, green beans, and mashed potatoes. I'm not the biggest eater, so after dinner there was still some food left on my plate. I go to take it into the kitchen and offer to help with the dishes, and he tells me to just relax and that he'll take care of it. So he takes my plate into the kitchen, and I don't think twice about it until I'm at his apartment a week later, and that exact same plate, with all the leftover food bits still on it, is just sitting out on his kitchen counter. Story 63. My younger brother, 32, has been living alone in our mother's house for 4 years, and I don't think he's ever picked up a broom or cleaned anything except for his clothes. I went over there while he was at work and saw our childhood home encrusted with dust on all surfaces and mold on almost all the walls. His bathroom smelled like open sewer with the mirror covered in toothpaste droplets. The craziest thing that I laughed at was that he stopped hanging his clothes in his dresser. On the couch in the living room was a pile of dirty clothes on one side and a pile of cleaner clothes on the other. Story 64. Going through a divorce. STBXW has nowhere to go, so she moves upstairs until things are finalized and she has somewhere to go. Now, I knew she was always a messy person. She tried hard the whole marriage to keep it under control, because it drives me crazy, and for the most part she did decently well. But once she no longer felt the need to do it anymore since we were no longer a thing, oh shit was it bad. Clothes everywhere. food, wrappers, filthy bathroom. Even her car started filling up with random shit. She still lives that way to this day. Story 65. Going to someone else's house as a child. It was like walking into a fairy tale for me. Light and love and warmth. I stopped thinking it was normal to be screamed at or hit by my mom. That it was normal to be called names. That it was normal to never be hugged or kissed or actually spend any time with my mom. To be allowed to come out of your room anytime you want. To not be locked outside because you were a bother. She was not a good person. Story 66. Had a friend who went through about a rough patch for several months on booze and substance abuse, and ended up getting his power shut off and then evicted a few weeks later. When we went through to clean his apartment out, I found boxes with neatly organized 1-2 gallon iced tea containers, all filled halfway with chew spit. That's when it really hit me how substance abuse can bring about mental illness that compounds the whole issue. He's straight and sober now. Since that whole ordeal about 10 years ago now. Story 67. Cleaning out my dad's house. He never was a neat person, but he had been sick for a while, and things were worse than usual. I can't unsmell it. He religiously changed the filter on the AC, though. Likewise, his car was a junkyard on wheels with meticulous maintenance records. Go figure. Story 68. I did home visits for hospice. I've met house goats, seen extreme poverty, heard that the medical supply delivery people had to move piles of hoarded stuff to make room for hospital beds. But the worst is the influencers. Apparently, peddling your child's struggle with illness and eventual death to strangers on the internet is a whole thing. I've had parents attempt to film house calls and watch them hawk t-shirts on Instagram Live to the tens of thousands of internet strangers who were watching their kid die. Just insanely bizarre stuff. Story 69. Moved into a friend's condo days after they got a job in a new state and moved out. It was disgusting. We even had a conversation where he asked, "How do you want me to clean it?" before I moved in. All I said was, "How would you want a place to be when you move in?" Do that. I had to spend a week cleaning. Story 70. When I was around 12, I lived in these apartments and made friends with a girl my age. One day I went inside her home and it was disgusting. It smelt like mildew. There were piles of clothes everywhere. Food everywhere. Her room was a sheetless mattress with just piles of clothes on and around it. Not sure if clothes were clean or dirty, completely covering everything. And I'll never forget when she just picked up a shirt from the pile and blew her nose into it and put it back. She was the oldest of 4, and her youngest sister had lice eggs literally falling off her hair. Story 71. When I was in middle school, I didn't realize how poor some of my friends were. I went over to one's house one weekend, and eventually we needed up in the kitchen to get some food. The cabinets were empty. The fridge had like one milk jug and another object, basically empty. My friend's brother proceeds to pull out some white bread and put ketchup on it, and ate that. Then asked if I wanted some. I felt so bad that I just said I wasn't really hungry anymore. It absolutely blew my mind that any family was like that. A reality check. Story 72. I've worked as a firefighter, Cheers EMT, for 5 years now. So to say I've seen some atrocious shit would be an understatement. But one incident in particular that stands out for me was delivering a baby in hoarder conditions. The mother was laying on the bed with literal trash piled up to the ceiling on both sides of her bed. I specifically remember swatting away used paper plates, cigarette packs, Q-tips, soda bottles, and so much more. I honestly felt much more sadness after that one, rather than disgust, simply because I knew a baby was coming back home to those conditions. Story 73. Growing up, I didn't realize my parents were hoarders. I just figured having 23 bottles of shampoo in the shower, for example, was normal. It wasn't until I moved out and lived on my own that I realized they had so much junk, and not being able to see countertops or walk through the house without stepping over stuff wasn't normal. Nowadays, I'm very focused on only having 1 or 2 of anything I need, not 10, 12. Story 74. I did pest control for a summer. Most houses were rich people who hate spiders or moles. But then I went into one house that looked okay on the outside, but when I stepped inside, every surface looked like it was moving. It was that infested. The poor old lady was so delusional about the state of the house that she was hopeful my little spray container could fix her problem. I just wanted to tell her she was better off burning the place to the ground. I quit that job soon after. Story 75. One time I walked into a friend's room. She lived with her parents, by the way, and the smell of litter box was reeking. Come to find out, it was just a hamster cage. The bedding hadn't been changed in weeks. Now I'm cat owner of 2 cats, and never have I ever let anything of theirs get that bad. So for her hamster cage to smell like that was wild. And she didn't even notice, 'cause she was nose blind to it. Story 76. I had a friend whose dad was the youth pastor at our church. Spent the night once, and they had a high-powered pellet gun to shoot rats and mice with, inside the FKN house. We were watching a movie, and bro literally walked into the kitchen with the pellet gun, aimed it at the baseboard behind the kitchen table, and shot Lowell. Did it like 3 times. I grew up broke and in trailer houses, but never had that happening, Lowell. Story 77. My friend's ex was probably the most filthy man I've ever met in my life. I actually was just reminded about him a couple days ago. This guy had like 3 rats with a dirty cage, trash everywhere, 2 dogs all in a single bedroom apartment that was like 500 SQ feet. His car was a mess too, with litter all over the floor and the seats always full. Embarrassing. TBH, definition of white trash. Story 78. My best friend all growing up had the messiest house. She had a couple of cats, so it always smelled like cat pee. That said, I got used to it because I was over there so often. Kind of became my second home. Story 79. After my brother had a stroke a few years ago, me and my sister had to clean his place out while he was in the hospital. Giant pile of clothes in one room with some dead mice mixed in. Half-empty cartons of eggs. Dishes that had been in the sink for months, unplugged deep freezer with food still in it. His toilet had broken, so he had removed it and just used the drain hole. Story 80. I had friends in 6th grade who were pretty obese. They had all the latest video game consoles and lots of games. I went over their house one night, and their mom ordered dinner for us all. Pizza, subs, wings, fries. It was awesome. Then I went over another time. Same dinner. Then another time. Same dinner. Turned out they are like that every single night, and the entire family was obese. Story 81. A friend who earned a lot more than me and has a more admired job, but slept in a dirty room on a bare mattress and took horrendous care of himself. The bed had cobwebs on it he didn't push away, and that was also his let's hang out space. I kinda got it when I heard more about his upbringing, but it was a sad sight to see and never improved. Story 82. I'm of the younger generation, and imagine my shock when I found out my grandparents don't watch TV or phone until 10 before going to sleep. They have meals at 6, do whatever they do until 8, and then just go to bed. As a kid, that's the wildest thing I've ever seen and experienced. Story 83. When I was about 12, I was at my friend's house, and his dad came home, and my friend started making fun of him for something or other. His dad just blushed and laughed. I waited for the other shoe to drop, but it never did. Being at that friend's house was when I learned not all dads are despots. Turns out some of them are just good people. Story 84. I visited a friend who I hadn't seen since high school. He lived in his parents' basement again, just like in high school, and there were pee bottles all over the room. The bathroom was right at the top of the stairs, which were right outside his room. Story 85. When my old roommate went out of town for 4 days, asking me to feed her cat, and when I walked into her room, there was a mountain of takeout containers and a half-eaten hamburger sitting on her desk. I suddenly understood why there was always a weird smell when I walked past her room and why she always left her door closed. Story 86. An ex-boyfriend, he never wanted me to see his apartment. We always met up at mine. Until one day, it was unavoidable. He had a cat, and he apparently didn't believe in a proper litter box. So the cat just shit and pissed all over the floor. He also had a thing against his neighbors seeing him take out trash. So he never did. Story 87. My mom was always anal about cleaning the outside of the toilet and polishing the mirrors and the faucets and the doors to the sink cabinet because disease is spread in kitchens and in the bathroom. She said, went to visit a friend and it was like someone released the Kraken in the powder room. Story 88. Going to a friend's house for the first time. Seeing a blanket across the back of the sofa, not uncommon, but it slipped as I sat down. Saw the whole back of the sofa covered in duct tape to make a covering. Then went to use the bathroom and saw the thickness of dirt all over the place. I never had a drink there in my life. Story 89. When my now wife ran out of both money and food in the middle of the month, and then just didn't eat. I immediately took her grocery shopping when I found out about this. It was a large factor in us getting an apartment together just 6 months into dating. Story 90. Had a summer job cleaning carpets. Entered a single lady's house in a nice neighborhood, and everything was covered in a layer of cat hair. Our machines wouldn't remove it, so we had to get in hands and knees making swirling motions to ball up the hair before using the machine. She claimed, I don't do housework. Story 91. Went to some pretty girl's apartment I was dating. Walked in and it was dirty as dishes piled up, clothes and trash all over, and had a smell of cat litter box. I made an excuse and left. Jerked it at home that night and never answered her calls, texts again. Story 92. When my friend was rooming with this guy in college, it was bad. At one point, both of their dogs had parvo, and there was dozens of poops just chilling all around the house. Not like a little more than 12, I'd say. Closer to 30. WTF. Story 93. Went to my friend's apartment for the first time. Smelled of weed, place uncleaned, sticky floors. Fridge smelled of old meat that's gone off. Thought to myself, wow, we need to have a talk sometime. Went home and realized I was similar minus the weed. You don't see your own filth sometimes. Story 94. I was 19 and entered someone's house, and even almost 18 years later, it is the worst smelling place by far I've ever been to. They had a ton of cats and apparently just let them piss and shit everywhere.